Hi there, I'm Renos Vakis, lead economist at the World Bank, and your host for Accelerating Development Ideas for Impact. This is not your typical podcast. It's an AI powered conversation brought to you by the World Bank Institute for Economic Development, where we unpack the latest research with one goal in mind, turning big ideas into real world impact. Let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Renos. You know, the more we dig into this report, Rethinking Resilience, Adapting to a Changing Climate, the more it says about how we think about preparing for the future.
It really does. It challenges the idea that resilience is something that can only be built by governments with big, large scale projects.
Exactly. The core message I took away is that we need to shift our focus. Instead of just government led initiatives, the real power is in empowering individuals, households, farms, firms, letting them adapt for themselves.
That is the central point. The most effective path to climate resilience starts with people, and it begins with something very fundamental: economic growth.
So it's not just about building better seawalls, it's about building stronger economies.
Precisely. The data is very clear. A 10% increase in GDP per capita is estimated to reduce the number of people most vulnerable to climate shocks by around 100 million.
Wow, 100 million. That's a huge number.
It is, and looking forward, income growth alone is projected to account for about 80% of the reduction in heat related mortality by the end of the century. But there is a major obstacle:
And what's that?
deep uncertainty, especially in poorer, more climate vulnerable countries. People are what we call ambiguity averse. When you cannot be sure what is coming, it can lead to inaction or to making the wrong choices.
Okay, so the problem isn't just the climate shock itself, it's the not knowing. It's the lack of tools to turn that big, scary uncertainty into a risk you can actually manage.
Exactly, and this is where policy must begin. First, by providing credible and accessible information. The information gaps are enormous.
How big are we talking about?
Well, consider this: sub Saharan Africa has only 1.6 weather stations per 1 million people. The United States has 217.
217 versus less than 2. That's a massive difference. And I assume that affects the quality of the information too.
It does, yes. The accuracy of weather forecasts is much lower in poorer countries. A 7-day forecast in a high income country can be more accurate than a 1-day forecast in some low income countries.
So you have less time to prepare for something you have less information about in the first place.
And this is the part I love: when you close that gap, it works. Early warning systems have benefit cost ratios of about 9 to 1.
Uh, that connects the dots for me. So, what does this look like in practice?
In India, there was a case where farmers received accurate long range monsoon forecasts. With that information, they increased their profits and were able to raise their family's food consumption by 7%. It is life changing.
So, information is the first step. The outline also points to strengthening markets for finance and insurance.
Yes, access to finance is a critical buffer. A global study found that the negative effect of hot days on student learning was much smaller in places where access to credit was expanding.
So, having a little financial flexibility helps a family, and by extension, their children, get through a tough time without long term consequences.
It does. In Nigeria, farm households with a bank account were able to keep their consumption stable after a drought or heavy rainfall. Those without an account could not. A bank account acted as a very effective shock absorber.
But I see a friction point here. The report mentions that insurance markets are actually failing to cover the biggest risk.
This is a very tricky part for policymakers. In India, for example, insurance products have shifted away from covering rare catastrophic rainfall events. They now tend to cover more moderate, frequent events, which leaves farmers less protected from the disasters that can wipe them out completely.
So the market is avoiding the biggest risks, which is exactly when people need it most. That leads to the third policy lever, then investing in infrastructure that connects market.
Yes, because well integrated markets act as a form of insurance themselves. Let's go back to Nigeria. Farm households living far from a road suffer significant consumption declines after extreme weather.
Because they can't get goods in or out easily.
Precisely. But those living within 5 kilometers of a road can smooth their consumption. A simple road connects them to a bigger market, giving them options. And in India, farmers selling in more competitive markets get 5% more output for each day of extreme heat. Competition helps them adapt.
Okay, so the first big takeaway is clear: empower people with information, financial tools, and access to markets. But this brings us to the second key finding, which really surprised me. It's about how poorly designed government help can actually backfire.
Yes, this is so important. Things like subsidies, bailouts, even social protection, if they are not designed carefully, they can create what is called moral hazard.
Where people make riskier decisions because they expect the government to rescue.
Exactly. It can end up increasing vulnerability in the long term. Take subsidized insurance. In Andhra Pradesh, India, farmers with subsidized insurance were 6 percentage points more likely to plant weather sensitive cash crops.
So the safety net encouraged them to take a bigger gamble, making them more exposed to the climate, not less.
Yes, and these subsidies are often not even targeted well. Under India's main crop insurance program, the subsidies are larger in richer districts, while enrollment is actually lower in poorer districts.
Right. Another area was protective infrastructure, like seawalls. Most people assume that's always a good thing.
But the data shows something else. These works can entice people and capital into harm's way. An evaluation of a proposed seawall in Jakarta found it would likely cause more settlement to concentrate behind it.
So you build a wall, people feel safe, and they move into a high risk zone.
And when you include the cost of that risky migration, it would double the project's true cost. Then you have the issue of insecure property rights. Globally, about 70% of land lacks secure tenure. People cannot invest in making their homes resilient if they do not securely own them.
This all connects. It feels like a web of incentives. What about social protection that's meant to help the poor cope?
It is crucial, but it can discourage necessary mobility if the benefits are tied to one location. In India, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, or NREGA, almost completely stopped seasonal migration in response to heat shocks in some states.
Potentially trapping people in places that are becoming more vulnerable. That's such a difficult balancing act for policymakers.
It is. And the last piece is land use regulation. Overly strict zoning in safe urban areas can choke the supply of affordable housing. This pushes poor people into informal settlements in the very areas most exposed to floods and other hazards.
You can see this clearly in the maps of Dhaka, where informal settlements are concentrated right in the flood zone.
It all comes back to a change in perspective. Building resilience is not just about concrete barriers, it's about breaking down economic and informational barriers. It is about designing policies that empower people with the agency to make their own best choices rather than making choices that inadvertently encourage risk. When individuals, farmers, and business owners have access to information, finance, and competitive markets, they become the most powerful engine of adaptation. That is the way forward.
Over to you, Renos.
Thank you for joining us. You can find the full report on our website. Just follow the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. And before you go, how do you plan to put what you learn into practice? And what topics you'd like us to explore next? We'd love to know. Until then, goodbye.